Today's Patreon dedication is for Jason Belk. Thank you, Jason. I can't say the name of this commander during this video because when I did all the way back during the original release of this character, the damn video got demonetized. We all know the commander and what she does, so let's just get straight into what the actual deck does. When I first saw this Massacre girl, see if you can recognise that, YouTube, I thought we'd have to ignore her second ability because we don't have access to red dealing damage with creatures. Turns out black actually does have a few means of dealing damage outside of combat with creatures. Orcish Bowmasters is the bane of every commander player's existence, and will throw individual counters all over the board. Dread Presence shouldn't struggle to see swamps in a mono black deck, and can be used for card draw in a pinch. And I didn't include it because I didn't want to rely on huge mana sinks, but Walking Ballista deals damage by removing its counters too, and the commander doesn't care if it isn't black because she's really progressive. She gives Wither to all your creatures equally, unlike that bigoted Corrosive Mentor who we'll include here anyway. Surely for redundancy. The damage dealers are few and far between though, as we already expected, so outside of combat damage, it'll be hard for creatures to consistently land those minus counters. That means that we have to concentrate more on Massacre girl's ability, which only cares about creatures being minus down to 0, which just so happens to be a speciality of black. Skim Render, Phyresis Outbreak, and Incremental Blight are means of spreading the plague onto any creatures of our choosing, whilst cards like Lily's Influence and Contagion Engine just indiscriminately put minus counters all over your opponent's stuff. But some effects do put minus counters on all the creatures, including your own, and whilst that can hurt us, I imagine we'll only play these effects when we really need to. Plus we can negate the minus counters with plus counters, using equipment such as Tarian's Soul Cleaver and Blade of the Blood Chief. But we don't need to just use minus counters. We can straight up deplete the enemy's toughness without even bothering to search for the dice. Drowning Eker, Tragic Slip and Defile are just a handful of the withering spot removal that we can use here, along with some instant speed potential board wipes like Bloodline Culling and Make Obsolete. And speaking of wipes, how's Toxic Deluge, Yahenni's Expertise, and Massacre Worm? Is it far enough into the video to say that word now? Again, some of these cards can affect our board, but in many instances we'll be able to cherry pick and dodge when we use them too. But simply keeping our opponent's creatures out of play and making them shake with rage isn't enough to win the game, no matter how much it makes you feel like you've already won. We need some payoffs for these effects. Spitting Dilophosaurus makes attacking even easier because it'll keep our opponents from blocking, and Necro Skitter will steal our opponent's creatures entirely, which is sure to cheer them up. Sangromancer will gain you stupid amounts of life and effectively acts as a means of gaining a few extra turns, and allows you to feed more life into cards like Crick. Speaking of life, there is a small Aristocrats package in here too, with Blood Artist, Psychosis Crawler, Bastion of Remembrance, and Meat Hook Massacre. Rise of the Dark Realms brings all the creatures you just killed off back under your control, and Revel in Riches could have you sit back on your mound of treasure and wait for the game to simply end in your favour. Nest of Scarabs leaves you with a heap of chump blockers and sack fodder to keep the chain going with a creature such as Yawgmoth, although it is noteworthy that there is a bit of a nombo in the deck here too, but if there was ever a commander to run these effects, it's Massacre girl. Consistent debuffs with cards like Knight of Soul's Betrayal, Kervek, and Illness in the Ranks will make it even harder for your opponents to keep creatures in play. These affect us too, but we've got a decent slew of high toughness creatures, and we're going to be sparing with the number of minus counters we put on our own creatures as well. But what if your opponents don't have any creatures left to knock back down to 0? Well, you remember that time you bought a family member a gift for Christmas that you wanted, knowing full well they'd never use it so you could swoop in and borrow it? Well, you should be ashamed of yourself for that for a start, but also we can pull a similar trick here. Orchard and Chamber will give them creatures over the course of the game, and Infernal Genesis not only switches off fast tutors, but also keeps your opponent swimming in creatures, ready to die immediately to those debuff effects, and, therefore, immediately feed you more cards for your sick and twisted behaviours to continue. But I think I've rambled on enough and given you enough evil ideas now. When you lose all your friends, don't blame me. This is just the excuse they needed,